Welcome. My name is Danae. I'm an occupational therapist and an executive functioning coach, and I am here to help make life easier if you have ADHD. Today, I want to talk about something that can really help you, and it is understanding the idea of locus of control. I'm going to go into exactly what that is and why it matters so much when you have ADHD in a minute. When I'm working with a client, normally at the end of our coaching sessions, they have some action that they want to take to move them towards their goals. And a part of what I do to help people prepare for that week is to ask them what could get in your way. Because there's a lot of things outside of our control and inside of our control that might impact our ability to do the thing. Let's say, for example, my client wants to run 4 days that week. Okay, what could get in your way? A lot of things. Let's talk about them. It could be raining if you were planning on running outside. You could not be able to find your running shoes in the morning. You could wake up with a headache. Your kid could wake up sick. You just look at what could interrupt your ability to do this, and what do you want to do about that? Some of these things are out of our control, but what is in our control is planning an alternative. If you're going to run outside, it's raining, do you want to plan to do something inside? If you wake up with a headache, is that a day you're not going to run? Are you going to move your schedule around? Are you going to try to run with a headache? I wouldn't, but that's not up to me to decide for somebody. Let's take a client who's a student. My experience in OT school was that there was more to study than I could internalize, that I could memorize. That was outside of my control. That was just the curriculum. I just wasn't able to retain as much as some of the other people around me. And so that was outside of my control. But there were pieces that were inside of my control. Some of the things that were in my control was where I focused my energy. I can get in study groups and listen to other people and hear what they're prioritizing. I can go to class and see what my professor is emphasizing and choose to study that material. I can break this down and study little by little to increase my chances of retaining this. Those were the pieces I can control. What I couldn't control was if I chose something and it was not the right thing. Right? You're not a mind reader. You may choose it wrong. If the volume was too big to retain all of it, and a lot of times the amount you have to read is, then the pieces I can control was what I focused on, but it didn't guarantee the outcome. It increased my chances of the outcome I wanted and worked out ultimately, but that's a part of this work. It's like, okay, you don't totally control the outcome, but you focus your energy on the things that increase your chances. When we're talking about locus of control, it has to do with our perceptions, what we believe about outcomes. Like, do we believe we have internal control over outcomes, or do we believe external factors like luck or genetics or something that we don't control that impact things? The reality is that life has both, right? Most situations have both. There are things we can control, there are things we can't control. When we know the difference, we can spend our energy on the things that are the most likely to give us the outcomes we want. With ADHD, a lot of times we might really struggle knowing, what do I prioritize? Where do I spend my energy? What actions do I take? If you have a better understanding of what things really are in your control and what things you can let go of, this can really help that decision-making process when you're trying to figure out, okay, what is the priority? What am I going to do here? What actions am I going to take here? How does this idea of external and internal locus of control relate to ADHD? It can really help us to get a handle on this because it jams us up in both directions. There's pieces that we think we can control that we can't, or that we think we can't control that we can. It helps to get clear on those. So for example, I can't really control that I struggle with memory. I can't force myself to remember. Example is my son's best friend's house. I've been to this house so many times, and just last week I had to ask my husband for the address, and he's like, but you've been there. Like, you've been there lots of times. I'm like, I've been there dozens of times. I've been there hundreds of times, and I still don't know the address. Will you send me the address? Because I am not remembering this. I don't really have control over that. Now, what I do have control over, if I didn't want to keep asking my husband and my son, was putting that address in the contacts so I don't have to ask somebody again, right? Remembering to do that piece maybe might be a little bit more in my control, but actually remembering the address, it's just not something I have control over. You don't have control over the intensity of your emotions sometimes with ADHD. I'm not saying you don't have control over what you do with that, but if I see a video of an abandoned dog in the rain, I'm probably going to cry. I don't have control over the fact that shows up in a really big way for me, probably a little differently than a lot of people around me, right? There's been times it's been very embarrassing to have this really big emotional reaction. I don't have control over that. What I do have control over is looking at my thoughts and how thoughts impact some of the emotions I have, and looking at maybe using some strategies to challenge thoughts that aren't helping me. I have control over experimenting with some strategies for overall regulation, emotional regulation, things that can help me bring that level down when I experience really, really big emotions that are kind of disorienting. I might decide to focus on stretching out the pause between a really strong emotion and my action. That's something that we might work on if you're dealing with impulsivity because of really strong emotions. But the actual emotion showing up in a big way is part of the experience for a lot of people who have ADHD. So if we feel embarrassed about that or focus on trying to change that, that's kind of a losing battle. There's so many other pieces that will impact how we show up with big emotions that can help. And that's where we want to spend our energy. You don't have control over your energy level. With ADHD, sometimes we experience huge fluctuations in our energy. A lot of people I work with are fatigued often because mentally operating with ADHD can be challenging. You can't necessarily control that. But there are things that you can do to impact it. So you might look at sleep and your routines around sleep and see if you're getting enough. You might look at how you're managing your time and your overwhelm, and if that's playing into your energy level, and use some strategies with that. You might look at nutrition and hydration and see, are these impacting my energy level? So there's absolutely pieces we can control, but we can't always control the outcome. We can work and focus on that and do our best here and kind of let go of the rest. You don't have control over attention regulation. This can be really confusing for people around you, maybe because we have these interest-driven nervous systems. And so you might really be able to focus when it's right in your sweet spot of interest, and you almost can't budge off of that thing you're interested in and focused on. Then, the next day you might be really struggling to be able to maintain your focus. You don't always have direct control over that. What you can do is look at, how can I structure my environment? Are there strategies that can kind of up my nervous system level to help me increase my focus? Are there things I can change that make this easier for me? Maybe impacting it with medication. There are things you can do that are in your control that can impact attention regulation. You don't have control over someone's perceptions of ADHD. You might be talking to Aunt Matilda over the holidays and she thinks this is totally made up and something from Big Pharma, and you're sitting there trying to figure out how to respond to that. It's a good moment to look at, what do I have control over? What do I not have control over? I don't have control over Aunt Matilda's ideas and beliefs and whether or not she's open to learning something. I do have control over how I spend my energy right here. Is this a moment that I'm going to try to advocate for myself or explain this or educate? Is it a moment where I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to get a snack. See you later, Aunt Matilda, right? How I respond to this is in my control. Cannot control this person's perception and reaction. A lot of times we spend a lot of energy trying to do that, or feel like it's our responsibility to do that. May not be how you want to spend your energy. It's your choice, right? That's the part you do control. When we have errors in what we believe is in our control, what we believe is outside of our control, errors in any direction kind of hurt us. If I believe that something is inside of my control, that is solidly outside of my control, then I'm going to do a couple of things that aren't very helpful. I'm either going to spin out and just worry. A lot of things that I can't really influence, but I'm going to be stuck in this loop, kind of practicing for all of them. Right? That's different than strategic what if. When I was talking about working with my clients and doing one round of that, like what if this, right? What if this happens? Because then we're coming up with solutions. That's fundamentally different than when we find ourselves just spinning and stuck on this what if, when we're taking responsibility for all this stuff that's really out of our control. So another thing that happens when we believe we're controlling things that we're not controlling is we end up taking on responsibility for all kinds of things that are our responsibility. We try to take responsibility for our people's thoughts about us. We try to take responsibility for this nebulous idea that we are totally behind on everything, even if we're not. We take responsibility for conflicts, even when it wasn't necessarily our fault. A lot of times with ADHD, people are so used to being the problem that their default is like, oh man, this was clearly my fault, even when it has nothing to do with their choices. I was working with a client. She had her own graphic design business, and she had a situation with one of her clients where their meeting went really off the rails. It did not go well. And she walked away from that meeting and was really hard on herself and felt like, man, I totally messed this up. I should have known better. All of this self-blame when we talked about that specific situation. It was not within her control. There were some things with this client, some unrealistic expectations, some poor communication. Some things were totally not in her control, but she was so used to seeing it. It's like, oh, I'm responsible for all of this. And she took that on rather than being able to focus on the piece that was in her control in that situation. That included setting some better boundaries. That included maybe clearing some communication up, that things that weren't so reasonable. There were pieces she could control, but when she took responsibility for everything, she missed those and instead was just kind of the scapegoat in that situation. When we make a mistake in that direction, we're taking on a lot and we're really not using our energy well. We're kind of misusing our energy. We're going to be tired, burnout, and exhausted when you're making those kind of errors with locus of control. So the other error that we make here is this belief that nothing's in our control, right? This is all luck or talent or external things. I don't control any of this. This can happen with people with ADHD who've had a lot of negative experiences, a lot of failures, a lot of flops. They start to lose hope that they can do things differently, that what they can do will impact their outcome because it hasn't. They've tried a bunch of things and a lot of people start to just kind of lose hope. Well, nothing I can do about it. No changes I can make. Just because it's hard doesn't mean there's nothing you can do. You're starting out with it more difficult with ADHD. That's just the reality of it. But there's still things that you can impact, right? This is that growth mindset. Like a growth mindset focuses on what we have control over. Maybe I'm not strong in this area, but I can grow. I can work on this. I can find resources. I can get what I need to improve. When I first started playing tennis, I had never been athletic, done any sports. I dreaded gym. I was afraid of the mile run. I just was an art girl. I was really into the creative art, that stuff. That was my jam. Was not into sport. And I had some friends when I was around 30 they had a tennis team. It was kind of like a beginning low-level tennis team, and they were like, oh, come on, you got to join this team. I'm like, I'm not a tennis person. And they pushed enough. I was like, okay, I'm going to give it a try. So I bought a few lessons with a coach, and he worked with me just to show me the basics before I tried to join this pretty basic team. After a few lessons, I'm like, okay, you think I'm ready to join the team? And he's like, yeah, you're absolutely ready. He said, you're not going to be the best. You're not going to be the worst. He's like, well, actually, you're going to be the worst, but that's okay, right? That's okay because you're going to get better. I do appreciate a straight shooter. He was right. I was the worst, and I was the worst for a while because what I couldn't control for was that many people on this team had been playing tennis for a while. Ones that hadn't might have had other sports that they had practiced throughout their lifetime. They had put in hours in coordination and ball skills I didn't have. I couldn't change that. I couldn't go back and get 25 years worth of athletic practice. But what I could do was start from where I was and work on it and work on getting better from where I started. And I did. I started out, I was absolutely hands down the worst, by far. But I got better. Right? I got better. I got to the point where I could really enjoy competition, enjoy the games, enjoy the sport, have fun, be a part of the team, move up on levels with the team. But in order to do that, I had to be able to really be clear of what was my control, what was not my control. Right? The growth mindset is not this overinflated sense of, manifest, I'm going to be able to do it, right? It's a realistic appraisal of this is where I am and I can grow. I can get better. And that's the part I can control. I control the time I put into this. I can control getting some resources that are going to help me. So focusing on what we can control and letting go of what we can't control is one of the best ways we can manage our energy with ADHD. It's tricky to manage our energy. It's one of the most important things you're going to do. And so if you can get clear about what pieces you really do control on anything and what pieces you have no control over and be able to let those go, it's going to help you manage your energy and get more of the outcomes that you want. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time.